The coppery scent of my mother's blood, warm and metallic, bloomed across the worn pine of the dinner table, stark against the chipped enamel plates. I watched, a small statue carved from terror, my 9-year-old legs fused to the linoleum floor, unable to scream, unable to move, as the life drained from her eyes. That torrential Kentucky night, huddled later in the suffocating darkness of a closet, I grasped a truth more terrifying than any childhood ghost story. Real monsters don't lurk under the bed with claws and fangs. Sometimes they tuck you in at night, share your surname, and wield love like a weapon before shattering your world. My name is Ruth Anderson, and the 76 years I've carried since that night have etched themselves onto my face, softened my hair to the color of winter snow, and gnarled my hands. Hands that now, most Sunday mornings, carefully arrange homemade apple and pecan pies on a checkered cloth at the Willow Creek Farmers Market. To the younger townsfolk, I am simply the sweet, slightly stooped pie lady, quick with a gentle smile and a kind inquiry about their kin. They don't perceive the landscape behind my eyes, the ancient sorrow that dims their sparkle even when my lips curve upward. These are the indelible marks left by a life forged in unimaginable destruction, a life I have painstakingly, arduously rebuilt from the ashes, piece by painful piece. Recounting this history stirs embers, I thought long dormant, so I ask for your understanding, your virtual presence in the comments. Perhaps share where you are listening from? Your likes, your shared attention, lessen the profound weight of this burden, assuring me that after decades of enforced silence, someone, finally, is listening. Our home stood isolated, nearly 2 miles down a rutted dirt track that surrendered to thick, impassable mud during the rainy seasons. It was a simple structure, unpainted clapboard siding, weathered to a perpetual gray, crowned by a tin roof that wept rusty tears onto the porch corners whenever a heavy storm rolled through. A sprawling yard, perpetually overgrown with tall grasses, hosted a few gnarled apple trees and a flock of chickens that scratched determinedly in the packed earth near the back steps. Old Rusty, our perpetually anxious mutt of indeterminate breed, served as our unreliable sentinel, barking furiously at squirrels, passing clouds, anything that dared disturb the quiet monotony. On the surface, we might have resembled many other families struggling in that rural Kentucky landscape. My father, William, worked long hours at the distant sawmill, returning each evening saturated with the scent of raw timber and honest sweat. My mother, Eleanor, was the quiet epicenter of our world, tending the house, raising my younger brother Tommy and me, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil in our backyard patch, and taking in laundry from more prosperous neighbors, her endlessly moving hands scrubbing and wringing fabric to supplement Daddy's inconsistent wages. Those hands, perpetually rough, calloused from lye soap and hard labor, possessed an incongruous tenderness at night, gently stroking my hair, smoothing my brow until sleep finally claimed me. The subtle shift began around my 7th year. Daddy started complaining of persistent headaches, a deep, relentless throbbing he described as a hammer pounding incessantly inside his skull day and night, offering no respite. Noise, any noise, Tommy's laughter, a dropped pot, even Rusty's barking, became an intolerable trigger, provoking sudden, terrifying bursts of rage directed at us all. Mama, her face etched with worry, tried to soothe him, urged him gently to visit the doctor in town. But Daddy, stubborn and proud, dismissed her concerns, insisting it was merely fatigue, a temporary affliction that would surely pass with time. It didn't pass. The headaches intensified, growing more frequent, more severe. And with their escalation came something far more frightening, something that still sends icy tendrils down my spine, decades later. What Mama began to call Daddy's episodes. Without warning, seemingly out of nowhere, his body would be seized by violent tremors. His eyes would roll back into his head, unseeing, and nonsensical words, fragmented sentences, would spill from his lips. Sometimes, these episodes culminated in terrifying violence. Plates hurled against the wall, Chairs splintered, his own fists pounding relentlessly against the clapboard walls until his knuckles were raw and bleeding. Sounds like epilepsy, Mrs. Miller, our nearest neighbor residing a quarter-mile down the muddy track, offered one afternoon after witnessing the aftermath of a particularly frightening incident. My own cousin suffered from it, requires proper controlled medication. Mama, desperate, finally managed to persuade Daddy to visit the town clinic after an especially harrowing episode where he'd become convinced imaginary insects were crawling on the walls and nearly set the kitchen ablaze trying to eradicate them. The doctor prescribed medication, small brown pills that held the promise of peace, but they were expensive, difficult to obtain regularly, and Daddy resisted taking them consistently. He complained they made him feel sluggish, foggy-headed, unable to perform the demanding physical labor at the sawmill effectively. I vividly recall Mama's furtive attempts to hide the crushed pills in his morning coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the dark liquid. Daddy inevitably detected the ruse, his suspicion instantly igniting into explosive fury. "Trying to poison me now, are you, woman?" he'd roar, violently upending the kitchen table, sending plates, cups, everything crashing onto the floor in a terrifying cacophony. Tommy and I learned to react instantaneously, scrambling beneath the relative safety of our shared bed, clinging to each other, trembling uncontrollably as the storm raged above us. The episodes worsened progressively. Daddy began experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing and hearing things imperceptible to anyone else. He'd engage in heated arguments with empty chairs, railing against phantom voices only he could hear. On some days, frighteningly, he failed to recognize us entirely, calling Mama by unfamiliar names, accusing Tommy and me of being malevolent changelings, devil's children who had infiltrated his home. Mama became our fierce, albeit terrified, protector, developing an instinct for the subtle signs preceding an episode, a certain vacant stare, a repetitive twitching motion of his hands. She would hastily shepherd us out of the house, sending us down the track to Mrs. Miller's farm or ushering us into the dusty, cobweb-draped storage shed behind the house, amidst the rusting tools and sacks of feed. "Stay hidden here with your brother," she'd whisper urgently, her eyes darting nervously towards the house. "And remain absolutely quiet. Don't make a single sound, no matter what you might hear." And the sounds we heard from within those thin walls were terrifying. Daddy's incoherent bellows, the sickening crash of breaking furniture, objects hurled against walls, punctuated by Mama's muffled sobs, her pleas for him to stop. Interspersed were his delusional accusations, paranoid railings about other men, baseless claims she was stealing his money, terrifying assertions that she plotted to murder him in his sleep. One afternoon, returning cautiously after the shouting finally subsided, I found Mama sitting slumped on the back doorstep, attempting to conceal a blossoming bruise beneath one eye, her lower lip split and swollen. She forced a weak, trembling smile upon seeing me. "It's nothing to worry about, Ruthie," she insisted softly, quickly lowering her hand. "Just clumsy me, tripped and hit the corner of the kitchen table." I knew, with the chilling certainty of a child forced to navigate adult darkness, that she was lying. But I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, because acknowledging the truth felt too dangerous, too terrifying to bear. The situation continued its downward spiral with each passing month. Daddy inevitably lost his position at the sawmill after experiencing a violent episode on the job, reportedly threatening a coworker with a sharp chisel during a paranoid delusion. With no steady income, his drinking escalated, often mixing cheap whiskey with the inconsistent doses of medication he occasionally took, a volatile combination that only exacerbated the severity and frequency of his episodes. Money became increasingly scarce. Our family survival grew more dependent on the meager income Mama earned from taking in laundry and the produce yielded by our small, struggling vegetable garden. "Why don't we leave him, Mama?" I finally whispered one night, huddled beside her on the cold kitchen floor as we carefully swept up the shards of shattered dishes following another of Daddy's destructive rages. He had finally collapsed into a stupor in his armchair. "Where would we possibly go, sweetheart?" she responded wearily, her voice thin, fragile. Her eyes, usually warm, looked impossibly tired, reflecting a burden far heavier than her 32 years should have carried. I have no remaining family myself, Ruth. No savings hidden away. And your daddy? She paused, sighing deeply. Deep down, he isn't inherently a bad man. It's this terrible sickness consuming him. Somewhere, buried beneath all that confusion and anger, the man I fell in love with, your father, still exists. I desperately wanted to believe her, clung to that sliver of hope. And occasionally, on rare good days when the debilitating pain seemed to momentarily recede, when he managed to take his medication as prescribed, we would catch fleeting glimpses of the father I vaguely remembered from early childhood. He'd sit quietly on the weathered wooden bench in the yard, beckon us closer to watch the sunset, paint the sky in fiery hues, perhaps share fragmented stories from his own youth, or whistle old, familiar tunes, while methodically repairing a broken fence post. During those precious, ephemeral moments, Mama would gaze at him with an aching tenderness, a love so profound it hurt to witness, as if desperately trying to memorize those fragments, to hold on to them against the encroaching darkness. But the good days became vanishingly rare, eventually disappearing almost entirely, swallowed by the relentless progression of his illness. The violent episodes became a near-daily occurrence, and the intervals between them were filled with his consuming suspicion, hair-trigger irritability, and pervasive paranoia. It was a Wednesday evening, late July, forever seared into my memory. A violent summer thunderstorm raged outside, the rain hammering against our tin roof with deafening force, each gust of wind rattling the window panes as if determined to tear the flimsy structure apart. Storms always agitated Daddy, the noise amplifying the tormenting voices he claimed to hear inside his head. Tommy and I were already sequestered in our shared bed, feigning sleep beneath the thin quilt, though my senses remained hyper-alert, attuned to every sound, every shift in the oppressive atmosphere. Then, piercing through the storm's cacophony, came Mama's sharp, terrified scream, followed immediately by the unmistakable crash of a chair overturning in the kitchen. Not an unusual occurrence, sadly. I instinctively pulled the worn blanket higher, covering Tommy's head as he began to cry softly beside me. Shh, I whispered, the lie automatic now. It'll be over soon. But this night felt different, charged with a heightened, terrifying intensity. The screams escalated, raw, desperate. I heard Mama pleading, her voice strained with terror. William, for the love of God, put that down. You don't understand what you're doing. Then, a sickening sound, unlike any I had ever heard before. Heavy, dull, wet, like a large melon dropped onto concrete, cracking open. It was followed by a soft, final thud. And then, silence. An abrupt, profound silence within the house, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof outside. That sudden cessation of noise terrified me more profoundly than any scream ever had. Against every instinct for self-preservation, knowing I shouldn't, I slid silently out of bed. Stay right here, I whispered urgently to Tommy, whose small body trembled beneath the blanket. Don't leave this bed for anything. My bare feet made the old wooden floorboards creak betrayingly as I crept down the darkened hallway towards the kitchen. The door stood slightly ajar, emitting a thin sliver of flickering lamplight. Pushing it open incrementally, cautiously, just enough to peer inside. The image that met my eyes remains indelibly burned into my consciousness. A psychic photograph that time has neither faded nor softened. Mama lay crumpled on the cold cement floor near the hearth, a dark, viscous trickle of blood meandering from a wound on her head, slowly coalescing into a glistening pool that spread outwards. And clutched tightly in Daddy's hand was the heavy wooden pestle she used for grinding spices, its end now darkly, obscenely stained crimson. His eyes, when they flickered towards the doorway, were glazed, vacant, utterly devoid of recognition, as if observing the scene from a vast internal distance. The voices. They finally stopped, he murmured, his voice disturbingly calm, quieter than I'd heard it in months. They finally went quiet. I don't know if he registered my presence there, frozen in the doorway, a small statue of paralyzing horror. I only know that I turned and fled back to our room, snatched Tommy's small hand, and dragged him with me into the deepest recesses of the bedroom closet, pulling the door shut behind us. We huddled together in the suffocating darkness, amidst the scent of mothballs and dust, shaking uncontrollably, clinging to each other until the first gray, merciless light of dawn finally filtered through the cracks. What transpired that horrific night, and in the agonizing days that followed, remains so profoundly painful that even now, nearly 70 years later, recounting it causes my hands to tremble. But the telling feels necessary. You need to understand, because the true nightmare, the one that would shape the rest of my life, was only just beginning. When the sun finally rose that Thursday, casting weak, watery light through the bedroom window, I remained huddled in the closet, cradling Tommy, who would eventually succumb to exhausted sleep amidst his quiet sobs. My entire body ached from the cramped position, a dull physical pain completely overshadowed by the crushing weight of the silence that permeated the house. A heavy, suffocating stillness, as if the very air had ceased circulating when Mama drew her last breath. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, slow, deliberate. Our bedroom door creaked open. "Ruth? Tommy?" Daddy's voice sounded unnervingly normal, almost gentle, reminiscent of the father I knew before the sickness began its insidious theft. For a fleeting, delirious second, hope flickered. Perhaps it had all been a monstrous nightmare. Perhaps I would emerge from the closet to the familiar, comforting aroma of Mama's cornbread baking in the kitchen. But reality offered no such reprieve. He discovered us huddled in the closet's depths. His eyes, when they met mine, were different yet again, not glazed with psychotic detachment as they were during his episodes, nor blazing with residual anger. They were chillingly empty, like dry, abandoned wells reflecting nothing. "Come now," he instructed with a frightening, unnatural calmness. "We need to fix things. Fix things." As if the horrific act could be undone, as if our shattered family could somehow be pieced back together. Emerging tentatively from the bedroom, I saw that he had already wrapped Mama's still form in one of the floral bedsheets she favored. Dark, damning stains marred the kitchen floor near the hearth, poorly concealed by his clumsy attempts at cleaning. The acrid chemical smell of bleach mingled sickeningly with the underlying metallic tang of blood, causing my stomach to heave. "Your daddy, he's unwell," he stated, referring to himself strangely in the third person, as if narrating events concerning someone else entirely. Perhaps within the fractured landscape of his mind, he was someone else now. "But he will take care of you both." He knelt, gripping my shoulders, his eyes boring into mine. "We will not tell anyone what transpired here. It was an accident. She slipped and fell. Do you understand me, Ruth?" Tommy began whimpering again, softly. Daddy's grip tightened painfully on his small arms. "Understand, boy?" She slipped. I nodded rapidly, pulling Tommy closer protectively. "Yes, Daddy, we understand." That morning, while the relentless rain continued its mournful drumming outside, Daddy carried Mama's shrouded form out to the backyard. Behind the dilapidated chicken coop, he dug a shallow, inadequate hole in the sodden earth. He buried her there. No coffin, no preacher, no prayers. Nothing but the blood-stained floral sheet and the indifferent weeping sky. Tommy and I watched, numb, from the bedroom window, tears seemingly frozen within us by the sheer magnitude of the horror, as our mother disappeared beneath the hastily shoveled dirt. In the subsequent days, Daddy concocted a flimsy narrative for the neighbors, claiming Mama had traveled unexpectedly to Louisville to tend to a gravely ill cousin. Few questioned the story extensively. Our family had become increasingly isolated due to Daddy's erratic behavior and violent outbursts. Mrs. Miller, bless her kind heart, even offered to assist with watching us children while Mama was supposedly away, but Daddy curtly refused, insisting he could manage perfectly well on his own. An unsettling, grotesque semblance of normality descended upon the household. Daddy ensured we attended school, prepared rudimentary, often burnt meals, stark, joyless contrasts to Mama's warm, flavorful cooking, and laundered our clothes haphazardly. At times he seemed almost rational, lucid, as if the underlying illness had inexplicably retreated. He spoke little, maintained a detached calm, and notably, experienced no further violent episodes during that period. I understood later that he had ceased taking his prescribed medication entirely, yet concurrently, he had also stopped drinking alcohol. It was as though he existed within a self-constructed reality, a fragile bubble, where the horrific events of that rainy night had simply never occurred. Nights remained the most terrifying ordeal. I would lie rigidly beside Tommy in our shared bed, clutching his small hand, the absence of Mama's comforting presence in the adjacent room, a palpable, aching void. Instead, the chilling knowledge that she lay just yards away, beneath the damp earth in the backyard, alone in the oppressive darkness, haunted my waking thoughts and infiltrated my dreams. It was during one of those interminable nights, perhaps 2 weeks after the burial, that I heard our bedroom door creak open slowly. This wasn't unusual. Daddy occasionally checked on us, ensuring we were asleep. I feigned sleep, as always, breathing slow and even. But this time felt different. I felt the distinct dip of the mattress as his weight settled on the edge of the bed beside me. "So much like her," he whispered, his voice thick, unfamiliar. His hand began stroking my hair, a gesture that initially mimicked tenderness, but quickly turned sinister. "Same hair," he murmured. "Same eyes." I kept my own eyes squeezed shut, praying desperately for him to leave, for this violation to end. But his hand continued its unwanted exploration, moving deliberately down my face, tracing my neck, venturing towards places no father should ever touch his daughter. That night, something essential within me fractured irrevocably. A wound inflicted that no amount of time, no measure of healing, could ever completely erase. I learned a brutal lesson that night, one no child should ever have to comprehend. Sometimes, the monster doesn't merely reside within your home. Sometimes, the monster is your own flesh and blood. The nocturnal visits became a recurring horror. I attempted to barricade the door, jamming a chair beneath the knob, but he easily forced it open, tearing the flimsy latch from the frame. I tried desperately to remain awake, vigilant, but profound exhaustion inevitably claimed me. I attempted to scream once, a choked, terrified sound, but his rough hand clamped firmly over my mouth, stifling the cry, his breath hot and stale against my face, smelling of damp earth and sweat. And then, during the daylight hours, he would revert to the facade of normalcy, interacting with us as if nothing untoward had transpired during the night, as if we were merely a grieving family, coping with Mom's prolonged absence. Tommy, though only 7, sensed the shift, the pervasive wrongness, but lacked the cognitive framework to understand its true nature. He only perceived that his older sister, his lifelong protector, now frequently cried in secret and trembled involuntarily whenever their father drew near. I began contriving excuses to send Tommy to sleep over at Mrs. Miller's house whenever possible, seeking refuge for him, ensuring at least he remained safe from the darkness that now permeated our home. My performance at school deteriorated dramatically. My grades plummeted. My usually attentive teacher, Miss Stevens, summoned Daddy for a conference, expressing concern regarding my sudden, marked transformation. "She used to be such a bright, smiling child," the teacher remarked worriedly. "Now she barely speaks to anyone, seems perpetually withdrawn. Has something specific occurred at home, Mr. Anderson?" It's the prolonged absence of her mother," Daddy replied smoothly, his expression a flawless mask of paternal concern. "We're all feeling her absence quite acutely. Her cousin remains gravely ill, I'm afraid. It may be some time yet before Eleanor can return." Miss Stevens naturally accepted his explanation without question. Who would suspect such profound darkness lurking beneath the surface of a seemingly respectable man? A widower, though none yet knew the truth, diligently caring for his 2 young children alone. I attempted just once to confide in someone, choosing Mrs. Miller. "My daddy, he does things to me," I managed to whisper, the words barely audible, shame and fear constricting my throat. "At night, things he shouldn't do." She regarded me with a mixture of pity and clear disbelief. "Now, child," she chided gently, "don't be fabricating such tales. Your daddy is unwell, everyone knows that. He likely does things unintentionally, sometimes gets confused. But what you're implying, that's different. You must have witnessed something inappropriate elsewhere, gotten ideas muddled in your young head." After that crushing dismissal, I never attempted to speak of it again. Who would possibly believe the word of a frightened 9-year-old girl against the facade of a grieving, responsible adult? The subsequent months bled into a gray, interminable haze of fear and endurance. Each day felt like navigating a treacherous minefield. I started losing weight noticeably, haunted by relentless nightmares, flinching involuntarily at any unexpected touch. But nobody seemed to truly notice, or perhaps, more accurately, they chose deliberate blindness. Then, during one of the darkest nights, permeated by the heavy stale odor of whiskey on Daddy's breath, his hands rougher, more demanding than usual, a desperate resolve finally ignited within me. I couldn't continue existing like this. More importantly, I couldn't allow Tommy to potentially face the same violation when he grew older. I couldn't permit the man I had once called Daddy, the man who had stolen our mother and shattered our lives, to completely destroy what little remained of our fractured family. Later that night, while his heavy, drunken snores filled the oppressive silence of the small house, I rose silently from my bed. My decision felt absolute, irrevocable. If no one else would intervene, if no one would offer protection, then I would be forced to protect myself, protect Tommy. Deep within the recesses of the kitchen cabinet, tucked far in the back, resided the small potent bottle of rat poison Daddy occasionally used. Its label bore a stark skull and crossbones, a graphic warning of its lethal contents. Mama had always kept it meticulously out of reach, terrified one of us might accidentally ingest it. Now, I held the small, heavy bottle in my trembling 9-year-old hands, feeling the immense, terrible weight of the action I contemplated. I was only 9, yet childhood felt like a distant, irretrievable memory, obliterated that rainy night when Mama's lifeblood stained the kitchen floor. The plan conceived in my desperate, terrified mind was chillingly simple. Daddy consumed black coffee every morning, heavily sweetened. The poison's inherent bitterness could likely be masked. A sufficient dose, administered stealthily, and the nightmare would finally cease. Tommy and I could then run frantically into town, claim Daddy had suffered another severe episode, fallen tragically, alone. No one would question it. His well-known peculiarities provided the perfect cover. Yet, standing there in the pre-dawn chill, the lethal bottle cold against my palm, a strange, unexpected sensation washed over me, an almost palpable feeling of Mama's presence beside me. I could nearly smell the faint, familiar scent of the cheap lilac water she wore for Sunday church services. An internal voice, calm yet insistent, whispered, "This is not the way, baby girl. Not like this." Whether it was truly her spirit intervening, my own nascent conscience recoiling, or simply the paralyzing fear of the irreversible consequences, I cannot definitively say. I only know that I carefully replaced the poison bottle deep within the cabinet's shadows and crept back to bed, burying my face in the thin pillow, silent tears finally flowing freely. But that heroite was not entirely in vain. Though I couldn't proceed with the most drastic, desperate measure, something fundamental shifted within me. A spark of defiance ignited. The will to fight back, to survive, to discover an alternative path towards liberation. I would not remain a perpetual victim. I needed to be strategic, patient, vigilant, awaiting the opportune moment. And that moment, unexpectedly, arrived far sooner than I could have ever predicted, unfolding in a manner entirely beyond my foresight. The morning after my aborted attempt with the poison, I awoke transformed. A sharp, unnerving clarity had settled within me, displacing the paralyzing fear. Standing at the kitchen window, preparing Daddy's morning coffee, my gaze drifted towards the disturbed patch of earth behind the chicken coop, where Mama lay buried. In that moment, I understood. Truth, not poison, would be my weapon. Poison would merely render me monstrous, like him. But the truth, the terrible secret buried just yards away, the truth known only to the 3 remaining occupants of this broken house that held the power to liberate us. Sheriff Johnson conducted routine checks on the outlying families, typically on the first Monday of each month, a recent government initiative aimed at monitoring rural welfare. His scheduled visit was merely 2 days away. During those intervening 48 hours, I executed the most convincing performance of my young life. I smiled readily when Daddy addressed me, suppressed the involuntary flinch when his hand brushed my arm, prepared his meals precisely as he preferred. He regarded me with initial suspicion, his clouded eyes scrutinizing me. "You seem different, girl. What's gotten into you?" "Nothing, Daddy," I replied, forcing an air of innocent sincerity. "Just missin' Mama something fierce. Figured I ought to help out more around the house." He seemed to accept the explanation, perhaps because it suited his convenience. And during the terrifying nights, when he inevitably came to my room, I endured his violation with a chillingly detached passivity, swallowing the tears, the revulsion, focusing solely on the 2 days remaining until potential liberation. When Sheriff Johnson finally arrived that Monday morning, astride his sturdy brown horse, I was waiting anxiously by the front gate. I had dispatched Tommy to Mrs. Miller's earlier, fabricating an excuse about needing to help Daddy clean the malodorous chicken coop. "Mornin', Sheriff Johnson," I greeted, striving for normalcy, though my heart hammered against my ribs so violently I feared he could hear it. "Mornin' there, little one. Your father about?" "Yes, sir. But he's still abed. Had one of his spells last night. The medicine leaves him powerful drowsy afterwards." The sheriff nodded sympathetically. Daddy's spells were common knowledge. "Sheriff," I began tentatively, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve, "can I show you something? It's a secret, but you need to see it." "What manner of secret, child?" he inquired, his brow furrowing slightly. "It concerns my mama," I whispered, leaning closer. "She never went to Louisville, never visited no sick cousin." The sheriff's expression shifted instantly, seriousness replacing casual concern. He dismounted slowly. "What exactly are you trying to tell me, Ruth?" "Come with me, please," I urged, turning towards the backyard. I led him behind the dilapidated chicken coop, towards the slight, telltale mound of disturbed earth, partially overgrown now, but still discernible. I pointed silently. "What's buried here, child?" he asked gently. "My mama," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady, though tears began to well, blurring my vision. "Daddy? He killed her, during that bad rainstorm weeks back, hit her head with a big wooden pestle. I witnessed it." The color drained from the sheriff's face. He looked from me, to the mound, then back to my tear-streaked face. "Are you absolutely certain about what you're saying, child? That's a mighty serious accusation." "I'm certain," I affirmed, finding strength in the telling. "He buried her right here, wrapped her in her favorite flowered bedsheet. If you dig, Sheriff, you'll find her. You'll see I ain't lying." I will not recount the grim details of the subsequent exhumation, the discovery of Mama's decomposing form, identifiable primarily by the simple blue bead necklace, a cherished heirloom from her own grandmother, still clasped around her neck. Nor will I dwell on Daddy awakening to the commotion, his desperate, incoherent flight from the house, shouting about voices commanding his actions, absolving himself of blame. Or his capture 3 days later, hiding wild-eyed in a damp cave near the creek, rambling nonsensically to himself. His eventual confession covered everything, not only Mama's murder, but also the repeated violations inflicted upon me during those dark, terrifying nights. I won't describe the simmering anger of the townsmen, some wanting immediate, brutal retribution before the law could formally intervene. What ultimately matters is that he was arrested, tried, and incarcerated, never to return to Willow Creek. Years later, word reached me that he had perished in prison during a violent altercation with other inmates who had learned the nature of his crimes against his own daughter. Upon receiving the news, I felt nothing. No surge of vindictive satisfaction, no lingering sadness. Just a profound hollow emptiness where overwhelming fear and righteous anger had once resided. Tommy and I were placed in the care of Aunt Martha, Daddy's estranged sister, a relative whose existence we hadn't even known. She lived in Cincinnati, a bustling city vastly different from our rural Kentucky existence. Aunt Martha was unmarried, a dedicated nurse at a large hospital, and by the standards of our former community, decidedly unconventional. She wore practical trousers instead of dresses, drove her own automobile, worked outside the home, and possessed an unapologetic directness, unafraid to voice her opinions. Back home, whispers labeled her too modern, the reason cited for her unmarried status. But for Tommy and me, two frightened, traumatized children arriving on her doorstep, clutching small bundles containing our meager belongings, she was precisely the anchor we desperately needed. "Blood is blood," she stated firmly upon our arrival, ushering us into her warm, tidy apartment. "Your family." Those initial months in Cincinnati were fraught with nightmares. Almost nightly, I'd awaken screaming, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by visceral images of Mama's blood pooling on the kitchen floor, the terrifying weight of Daddy's hands upon me. Aunt Martha consistently demonstrated extraordinary patience. She would hasten to my room, switch on the comforting glow of the electric bedside lamp, a novelty after our lamplit rural existence, sit gently on the edge of my bed, and simply remain with me, her calm presence a soothing balm, until the trembling subsided, until my breathing returned to normal. "What happened to you was monstrous, Ruth," she would state forthrightly, never minimizing the trauma. "But it does not define the person you are destined to become. You are more than the sum of those terrible experiences. One day, this agonizing pain will eventually become just a scar, healed over, no longer an open, weeping wound." Initially, I struggled to believe her words. How could anyone possibly overcome such profound horror? How could a normal life ever be attainable after witnessing and enduring such depravity? But Aunt Martha possessed a quiet persistence. She enrolled me in a reputable city school, arranged for me to see a psychologist, a concept entirely foreign to my previous existence, and gently encouraged me to explore activities beyond academics, swimming lessons, piano instruction, painting classes. Anything to engage my mind and body constructively, to begin layering new, positive memories over the deeply ingrained traumatic ones. "You need to learn how to truly live again, child," she advised wisely, not merely survive. With the passage of time, supported by Aunt Martha's unwavering belief, and the gradual progress made in therapy, the nightmares began to recede, their frequency and intensity diminishing. Slowly, tentatively, I began to smile again, forged new friendships at school, gradually learned to look at my reflection in the mirror without succumbing to waves of shame and self-loathing. Tommy, too, thrived in the vibrant, stimulating environment of the city. He quickly integrated with the neighborhood children, embracing the simple joys of street baseball, returning home daily with scraped knees, boundless energy, and 1,000 chattering stories about his adventures. At 15, inspired perhaps by Miss Stevens, my compassionate former teacher who had sensed my distress, but lacked the means to intervene, I decided upon my future path. I wanted to become a teacher myself. I thought often of the countless other children potentially suffering in silence, trapped in similar circumstances, lacking anyone to recognize their pain or offer assistance. I felt a burgeoning desire to make a tangible difference in their vulnerable lives. Aunt Martha wholeheartedly supported my ambition, assisting me with enrollment in the local normal school for teacher training. Those years were academically demanding, but profoundly rewarding. By the age of 18, I secured my first teaching position at a neighborhood preschool. Witnessing the innocent faces of those young children illuminate with the joy of learning, of discovery, felt like applying a soothing balm directly to my own deeply wounded soul. Life continued its relentless forward march. Tommy, fulfilling Aunt Martha's immense pride, successfully graduated from medical school, specializing in pediatrics. He often joked with underlying seriousness that his choice of specialty was directly influenced by me, by the fierce protectiveness I had shown him during our darkest times, when no one else could. I eventually met Jim at a school function, He was the recently widowed father of one of my kindergarten students, navigating the challenging terrain of raising his 5-year-old son, Mark, alone. We initially connected over shared experiences of single parenting and the complexities of childhood development, our conversations gradually expanding to encompass shared interests in music, literature, life itself. Before long, a tentative romance blossomed. Intimacy remained challenging for me. Even after years of therapy and healing, a man's touch could still trigger unwelcome echoes of the past. Jim, sensing my underlying discomfort, demonstrated extraordinary patience, unwavering respect. When I finally summoned the courage to share the full, harrowing details of my childhood, he wept alongside me, holding my hands gently, his empathy palpable. "None of that history diminishes the woman you are today, Ruth," he stated firmly, his eyes filled with sincere admiration. "And the woman you are today is the strongest, kindest, most resilient person I have ever had the privilege of knowing." We married on a bright spring Sunday in 1970. I was 24 years old and felt, genuinely, as though I were embarking upon my true life for the very first time. Jim, his son Mark, who seamlessly became my own beloved son, and I forged a family unit I had never dared imagine possible. 3 years later, our daughter Emily arrived, a joyful little girl, blessed with a head full of unruly curls and an infectious, easy smile, instantly becoming the cherished center of our world. Holding my newborn daughter close, gazing down at her perfect, innocent face, I made a silent, fervent vow. The promise no one had been able to offer me: she would always be safe, unconditionally loved, fiercely protected from any monster, ensuring no darkness would ever touch her as long as I drew breath. The revenge I had contemplated as a terrified child, wielding truth as a weapon against my father, hadn't marked the conclusion of my story. It merely represented the brutal, necessary beginning of a long, arduous, yet ultimately redemptive journey of healing, rebuilding, and finally embracing a full, meaningful life that defied the destructive predictions of my traumatic origins in rural Kentucky. Sometimes, even now, when I close my eyes, the phantom image flickers, Mama's blood spreading inexorably across the kitchen floor. I occasionally feel the phantom weight of Daddy's presence settling onto the edge of my bed. But these spectral memories no longer possess the power to paralyze me. They are ghosts confined to a past that can no longer inflict active harm. The truest justice wasn't secured by my father's imprisonment or his eventual demise within those prison walls. It resides in the fact that I lived, that I learned to love again, to trust again, that I successfully built a healthy, nurturing family of my own, decisively breaking the potential cycle of violence and trauma that could have easily consumed my future. Justice manifested in discovering, against all odds, that even from the most barren, desolate ashes of profound tragedy, life, resilience, and even beauty can eventually, improbably, bloom. The passage of years inevitably alters perspective. My children grew into successful adults, the nation and the world transformed in countless ways, yet the deep shadows cast by my childhood never fully dissipated. Jim remained a steadfast, loving husband for 35 years, a decent, honorable man who patiently helped me reconstruct my fractured trust in relationships, in myself. His battle with lung cancer, ending in 2005, marked another profound loss, another lesson in navigating grief. But the years we shared were predominantly good, filled with the ordinary joys and inevitable challenges inherent in any long-term marriage. We consciously raised Mark and Emily grounded in principles of love, mutual respect, and open communication, values instilled in me by my mother during those brief, formative years, and later reinforced by Aunt Martha's pragmatic wisdom. Mark, the son Jim brought into our union, truly became my own in every sense that mattered. He pursued engineering, married his college sweetheart, and blessed me with 3 cherished grandchildren whose laughter now brightens my days. Emily, my biological daughter, mirrored my own path, becoming a dedicated teacher, though she extended her reach further, now running an acclaimed charter school serving underprivileged children on Cincinnati's outskirts. Tommy, my beloved brother, established a successful pediatric practice, often humorously attributing his career choice to my early fierce protectiveness during our shared trauma. Despite the outward appearance of a happy, fulfilled existence, the secret I carried remained a heavy, internal burden. For decades, only Jim, Aunt Martha, and Tommy knew the full, horrific truth of what transpired in that isolated Kentucky house. My own children remained unaware, shielded from the darkness. Why dredge up such painful history, Ruth? Aunt Martha would gently inquire whenever the subject arose between us. The past is firmly behind you now. But it wasn't entirely behind me. The past possesses an uncanny ability to resurface, often when least expected. The first significant tremor occurred when I reached the age of 50. I was teaching my third-grade class when a new student was enrolled mid-year. A small, thin boy with perpetually frightened eyes and distinct bruise-like finger marks visible on his upper arms. Gazing at those marks, the classroom momentarily dissolved around me. Suddenly, viscerally, I was transported back decades, back to that cold, terrifying bedroom in Kentucky, feeling the phantom pressure of Daddy's hands on my small body. I fainted, collapsing in front of my startled students. Awakening later in the school nurse's office, the antiseptic smell sharp in my nostrils, I confronted a truth I could no longer suppress. I needed to truly face the trauma I had kept meticulously compartmentalized for so long. I couldn't continue pretending that terrified 9-year-old girl wasn't still an intrinsic part of my being. That incident finally propelled me into formal therapy. Already middle-aged, I found myself confiding in Dr. Sarah, a psychologist barely half my age, yet possessing a profound wisdom that immediately impressed me. Trauma doesn't simply vanish with the passage of time, Mrs. Anderson, she explained patiently during our initial sessions. It remains stored within the body, embedded in memory. But, she offered gently, we can learn to integrate it, to live with it differently, to lessen its power over the present. Over the subsequent years, through painstaking therapeutic work, I unearthed deeply buried memories, shed tears I thought had dried up decades prior. I confronted the complex, residual anger towards my mother for her perceived inability to protect us more effectively, towards my father for his monstrous betrayal, and the destruction of our family, even towards a silent God for permitting such suffering. Anger is a natural, valid part of the healing process, Dr. Sarah would reassure me consistently. You needn't feel ashamed of its presence. Gradually, painstakingly, I arrived at a place of deeper understanding, acknowledging my father not merely as evil, but as a man profoundly ravaged by untreated mental illness. Recognizing my mother had likely done the absolute best she could under terrifying, impossible circumstances, armed only with limited resources and societal constraints. Internalizing the crucial truth that I, as a vulnerable 9-year-old child, bore absolutely no responsibility for the horrific events that transpired. Forgiveness wasn't a singular event, but a slow, incremental process, arriving in small, unexpected droplets, gradually filling the vast emptiness left by trauma. I forgave my mother first, then eventually myself. Forgiving my father remains the most complex, perhaps still incomplete, aspect of that journey. At 60, I made another life-altering decision. I chose to share my story with my adult children. Emily wept openly as I recounted the events, her tears flowing freely for the childhood horrors I had endured. Mark sat in stunned silence throughout, his gaze fixed on a distant point, seemingly struggling to reconcile the mother he knew with the traumatized child I described. Afterwards, they embraced me with a fierce tenderness I hadn't experienced before. Not the hug of children seeking comfort from their mother, but the protective embrace of adults shielding someone they love profoundly. Why did you never tell us any of this before, Mom? Emily asked later, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to shield you, I answered honestly. To allow you both to grow up unburdened by the weight of my past. I hesitated, then added softly, and perhaps, I was also ashamed. Afraid of how you might perceive me. Afraid of judgment. Ashamed of what, Mom? Mark interjected, genuine surprise coloring his tone. You were a victim. More than that, you're a survivor. That word, survivor, resonated deeply within me for days afterward. I had never conceptualized myself in those terms. Victim, yes. Scarred, certainly. But survivor implied agency, strength, resilience. It reframed my narrative. Following that pivotal conversation with my children, another internal shift occurred. I began speaking more openly about my experiences, albeit selectively. Not broadcasting my trauma indiscriminately, but sharing my journey within contexts where it might offer solace or insight to others facing similar struggles. I joined support groups for adult survivors of childhood abuse and domestic violence. I accepted invitations to speak at local schools, educating teachers and counselors on recognizing the often subtle signs of child abuse. I started volunteering regularly at a shelter for children removed from violent homes, offering quiet empathy, a listening ear. With each story shared, each connection forged, each hand held, the immense weight I had carried internally for so long seemed to subtly lessen. Not through forgetting, but through transforming painful memories into catalysts for positive change, for helping others navigate their own darkness. My story was no longer solely about the girl who suffered immeasurably. It was evolving into the narrative of the woman who endured, survived, and purposefully chose to help others find their own paths toward survival and healing. At 70, already retired from my long teaching career, but remaining actively involved in volunteer work, I received an unexpected invitation. A documentary filmmaker, producing a piece focused on survivors of childhood abuse, requested an interview. My name had been recommended by one of the shelter coordinators. My initial instinct was immediate refusal. Sharing my story within the contained intimacy of support groups felt manageable. Exposing my deepest wounds to the impersonal lens of a camera, for potential public consumption by strangers, felt terrifyingly vulnerable. But then, I considered the potential impact. The number of individuals who might benefit. The number of endangered children who might be saved if greater public awareness facilitated earlier intervention. I'll do it, I confided to Jim's photograph on my nightstand that evening, continuing my long-standing habit of nightly conversations with my late husband. I believe it's time for this story to emerge completely from the shadows. The filming process proved emotionally grueling. Reliving the traumatic events in explicit detail, articulating the profound fear and pain before unfamiliar faces under bright studio lights, pushed me to my limits. Yet, upon completion, an unexpected sense of profound relief washed over me, a lightness I hadn't anticipated. The documentary, titled Voices of Silence, garnered critical acclaim, won several awards, and was subsequently screened widely in educational institutions, universities, even police training academies. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of letters and emails poured in. My granddaughter patiently taught me basic computer skills at 72, enabling me to engage with the correspondence. Messages arrived from individuals across the country who saw their own experiences reflected in my story. People who found the courage to finally seek help after hearing my testimony. One letter, in particular, remains etched in my memory. It arrived from an 85-year-old woman, her handwriting frail trembling. Dear Ruth, for 73 long years, I never uttered a word to anyone about what my stepfather did to me when I was just 12 years old. I carried that terrible secret, fully expecting to take it with me to my grave. After watching your powerful testimony, I finally found the courage to tell my daughter. It felt like lifting a physical piano off my back. Thank you, Ruth. Reading her words, tears streamed down my face. I reflected profoundly on the insidious nature of silence, how it functions as a prison, how we hoard secrets believing we are protecting ourselves, when in reality, we are merely nourishing the darkness that thrives within that silence. Now, at 76, comfortably settled in my favorite rocking chair on the porch of my Cincinnati home, observing the bustling street life, a world away from the isolating dirt track of of my childhood, I recognize my story extends beyond mere pain and eventual triumph. It speaks fundamentally to the paramount importance of truth, however painful its excavation may be. It underscores the necessity of shattering the silence that insidiously protects abusers while simultaneously imprisoning their victims. The horrors I endured decades ago continue to afflict countless children today, in this nation and across the globe. Children who, like my younger self, feel voiceless, trapped, disbelieved. Children residing within homes that should represent sanctuary, but have instead become terrifying prisons of fear and violation. If you are listening to my words now, and you are one of those children, please internalize this. It is not your fault. It never was. You inherently deserve safety, love, respect. Your voice holds immense power. Your story matters. Do not cease seeking help until you find someone who truly listens, who truly believes you. And if you are an adult survivor, still carrying the heavy burden of childhood abuse in silence, please know it is never too late to embark upon the path of healing. Silence serves only the perpetrators. Your story, however agonizing to recount, possesses the potential to become the guiding light that illuminates someone else's path out of profound darkness. Aging possesses a peculiar tendency to resurrect memories, long thought dormant, buried beneath layers of time. Approaching 80 now, I feel the past knocking more insistently, its presence more palpable. It's as though time, rather than diluting memory, distills it, leaving behind only the potent essence, sometimes bittersweet, often painful, always intensely vivid. My grandchildren frequently inquire how I managed to overcome the profound trauma I experienced. The honest truth is, one never fully overcomes trauma of that magnitude. You learn, gradually, painstakingly, to integrate it, to live with it. Like a resilient tree slowly enveloping a piece of barbed wire embedded in its trunk, the scar remains, becoming an intrinsic part of the tree's structure, a testament to its endurance. When I turned 65, I undertook a journey I never previously imagined possible. I returned to Willow Creek. The town had undergone significant transformation. I barely recognized the landscape of my childhood. Main Street boasted paved roads now. A large chain supermarket dominated one end. A modern bank branch occupied a corner lot. The creek where Tommy and I once spent hours catching minnows had been contained within concrete channels. The physical structure of the house where I grew up, the epicenter of my trauma, no longer existed. In its place stood a cheerful bakery, complete with umbrella-shaded tables on the sidewalk. I walked down the familiar, yet altered, street until I reached the precise location where our property once stood, where my life irrevocably fractured. Ordering a coffee from a young, friendly waiter, I chose a table positioned directly over the ground where Mama had been hastily, secretly buried, the ground where my childhood innocence was violently extinguished on that long-ago rainy night. The coffee arrived, hot and sweet. I sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through me, momentarily chasing away the internal chill that inevitably accompanies revisiting this haunted past. "Are you visiting from out of town?" the young waiter inquired politely, noticing my distant, contemplative gaze. "I used to live here," I replied softly, "a very long time ago." No further explanation felt necessary. What purpose would it serve? This young man hadn't even been born when those terrible events unfolded. For him, this location was simply his father's thriving bakery, a place of commerce and community. The ghosts that lingered here, palpable only to me, belonged exclusively to my history. During that same poignant trip, I visited the local cemetery. Following the unexpected notoriety generated by the documentary, the Willow Creek Town Council had arranged for Mama's remains to be exhumed from their unmarked backyard grave and transferred to a proper burial plot. I brought flowers, vibrant red carnations, just like the one she had lovingly cultivated in pots on our small front porch. Standing before the simple headstone bearing her name, Eleanor Anderson, I remained for a long while, engaged in a silent, one-sided conversation, updating her on the lives of her children, her grandchildren, describing the fulfilling life I had managed to build despite the wreckage left behind. "You would be proud, Mama," I whispered finally, before turning to leave. That visit felt like a necessary closure, a final, definitive farewell. I haven't returned to Willow Creek since, nor do I intend to. Some doors, once closed, must remain so to allow forward movement. At 70, I faced another profound loss. Tommy, my brother, my childhood accomplice, the only other soul on earth who had shared even a fragment of the same nightmare, passed away following a prolonged battle with Alzheimer's disease. It was a cruel, relentless illness, gradually stealing pieces of his memory, until, by the end, he no longer recognized me, often confusing me with our mother. "Mama, I'm scared," he would murmur, his eyes lost in a past I desperately wished he could forget. "Daddy's yelling again." His departure left an irreplaceable void, silencing the last living witness to my earliest trauma, leaving me seemingly alone with the weight of those memories, lacking external confirmation. Yes, Ruth, this truly happened. It wasn't merely a child's horrific nightmare. Aunt Martha had passed away years earlier, taking with her the pragmatic strength that had sustained me during my most vulnerable period. Jim, too, was gone. The people who anchor us during life's fiercest storms eventually embark upon their own final journeys, leaving us with the ongoing task of living, of integrating the lessons learned, of passing forward the wisdom gained. It was following Tommy's death that I began meticulously writing my memoirs, not with any intention of publication, but solely to ensure my story, our story, wouldn't perish alongside me. A legacy for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, so that long after I am gone, they might better comprehend the complexities of their grandmother's life, understand the source of the resilience others claim to perceive in me. The act of writing proved profoundly therapeutic. Each word committed to paper felt like carefully placing a small symbolic headstone upon a long unmarked grave, finally sealing aspects of a past that had remained open, exposed, and bleeding for far too long. Upon completing the manuscript, I presented copies to Emily and Mark. Emily wept quietly as she received hers. Mark held the bound pages pressed against his chest for a long moment before finding his voice. "Thank you for entrusting us with this, Mom," he stated solemnly. "We will treasure it, treat it with the utmost respect it deserves." In 2020, the arrival of the global pandemic, ushering in an era of unprecedented fear and isolation, unexpectedly highlighted the resilience forged through my earlier life experiences. While many younger individuals succumbed to despair during the prolonged confinements, I discovered an inner fortitude grounded in the memory of previous isolations, other prisons, both literal and metaphorical, I had already endured and overcome. I became a source of virtual support for my grandchildren via video calls, yet another technological hurdle I embraced, telling stories to my young great-grandchildren, organizing an online prayer circle with friends from my church community. Paradoxically, my advanced age, perceived by many as a primary vulnerability factor, transformed into my greatest asset. Having witnessed so much, survived such profound adversity, a global pandemic, while undeniably frightening, felt like a challenge I possessed the internal resources to navigate. "Grandma is practically indestructible," my grandson Peter joked during one of our video chats. "Not entirely," I thought privately. "Not indestructible. I've been destroyed, shattered, multiple times throughout my life. But crucially, I learned how to meticulously rebuild myself, piece by painstaking piece, discovering that strength often resides most profoundly in the places where we have been broken and subsequently healed." Recently, Emily invited me to address the teaching staff at the school she directs. The occasion was a professional development training session focused on identifying signs of potential child abuse among students. My initial inclination was hesitant refusal. "I'm too old for public speaking engagements," I reasoned. But ultimately, I accepted. Seated before that assembly of bright, dedicated young educators, radiating energy and hope, I recounted my story once more. I spoke of the torrential rain drumming on the tin roof that fateful night, described the sickening sound of the pestle striking my mother's skull, articulated the terrifying violation of my father's hands, detailed the desperate decision to wield truth as my only available weapon. I also spoke candidly about the long, arduous process of rebuilding, the transformative power of therapy, the complex, often incomplete nature of forgiveness. When I concluded, a young teacher near the front raised her hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mrs. Anderson," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, "how did you manage not to become bitter after enduring all of that?" The question caught me somewhat off guard. I hadn't explicitly considered my journey in terms of bitterness avoided. After a few moments of quiet reflection, I offered the most honest answer I could. "I believe," I began slowly, "it boiled down to a conscious choice, made daily. Each morning upon waking, I faced a decision. Would I permit the horrific events of my past to dictate the entirety of my present and future? Or would I somehow utilize those experiences, however painful, as fuel, as strength, to actively construct something different, something better?" I paused, meeting her gaze directly. Choosing the latter path, the path of healing and rebuilding, was never easy. There were countless days when bitterness felt like the only logical, perhaps the only possible, response. But at some pivotal point along the way, I recognized that embracing hatred, succumbing fully to bitterness, would grant my father continued power over me, allow him to continue destroying me spiritually, even long after his physical death. Growing old inevitably means confronting mortality with increasing clarity. At 76, I am acutely aware that I possess significantly more past than future. Yet, that awareness doesn't evoke the fear it once might have. I have lived sufficiently, loved deeply, suffered profoundly. I feel prepared for whatever culmination awaits, whatever form it may take. Looking back across the landscape of my life, I perceive a long, often arduous, winding road. Certain stretches were shrouded in darkness so complete I could barely discern the next step. Other passages were illuminated by a unique quality of joy, a profound appreciation perhaps accessible only to those who have intimately known deep, inconsolable pain. It has been, undeniably, a full life, replete with its inherent sorrows and unexpected beauties. If I could somehow communicate across time with that terrified 9-year-old girl, hidden trembling in a dark closet while her world imploded around her, I would simply whisper, "Hold on, little one. The journey ahead will be long, fraught with difficulty, but you possess the strength to endure. You will make it through. One day, unimaginable now, you will be an old woman, rocking peacefully on a porch, watching sunsets paint the sky, surrounded by the warmth of people who cherish you. One day, you will find the courage to share your story, and in doing so, you will inadvertently help countless others navigate their own turbulent storms. And on that future day, you will finally comprehend, in some mysterious, ineffable way, that none of it, not the pain, not the struggle, not the long path towards healing, was entirely in vain."